Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Viddhishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shri Sita Lakshmana Bharata Shatrugna Hanumat Sameta Shri Ramachandra Paraparamane Namaha. Om salutation to Shri Ramachandra, the Supreme Being, accompanied by Sita, Lakshmana, Bharata, Shatrugna, and Hanuman. So last week we gave something of an introduction to the story of Rama, and I hope we pointed out a few things, that there are many layers and levels, that this is a historical account. It is an itihasa, that is in the classification of accounts. And I may have mentioned that there are some fantastic things within the story. So the story provides entertainment. The story provides scope for dramas, scope for expressing the story in song, in dance, and in poetry also. The great poet Tulsidas has made a wonderful poetic presentation of this story. And then to the philosopher, it has a layer of meaning. To the humanist, it has a layer of meaning for society. It teaches us how to live in a moral way. It teaches us the qualities of righteousness, truthfulness, fidelity. It teaches us the aspects of strength and courage. These are supreme principles, just in a social context. Social context means we live in a life, and that life is not always smooth. We have to wonder, why is it that people who do bad things, people who are intrinsically and very obviously evil, why is it that life goes a little smoothly for them? It's only because they're on a road to destruction, their own destruction, and they don't realize it. Why don't they realize it? It's because, like all of us, we are enamored with the world as such, or our interpretation of it as something that is permanent, something that is permanently meaningful. No doubt it has a meaning on every level, but we have to go through all these different levels. These are kind of levels on an adventurous path where we look to the innermost reality and get an aha moment. At each stage, we get an aha moment. What a beautiful journey this is. And so the story of Ram will illustrate for us our own journey and how we should conduct ourselves with all the qualities, using Rama as a model. Not just Rama, but he has 4 brothers. I'm going to treat this series as if you know nothing about the story, and I'm going to pause at every moment to see what lessons we can learn from it. So carrying on then, there are some terms that would be useful in our first section, which is called, you see every section is a kandam, a portion, bala kandam. Bala, that is a small boy, or is the beginning section, the primary section. First of all, it is set in Ayodhya. This is significant. The meaning of Ayodhya means invincible. It tells us about a kingdom. Immediately we can imagine. It tells us about the kingdom of Koshala, whose capital is Ayodhya. It tells us immediately about those who are administering this kingdom, because it describes a kingdom where everyone is content and happy, more importantly, virtuous. Why should people be virtuous in society? Is it because there are laws? Is it because there's a fear of retribution? When you impose a law, there'll be naturally a reward or a punishment. mainly a punishment. Don't do this, don't do that. But when society is well educated, when society knows its social role for the benefit of everyone, when society understands that there's a deeper reason for living, these four aims of life are well established. That is based on Dharma. Every behavior in this context will be as a result of Dharma. Dharma, as I've said many times before, comes from a root, the thing that holds things, binds things together in a certain harmony. When we weave a cloth, we know that the strength of the weave really is because everything is working together in a kind of harmony, knitted together as it were. We have the expression, the fabric of space and time. It's the same concept, the warp and woof, as it's described in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. That is like a woven structure. Even the word, of course, tantra, implies a weave, something that holds everything together. So this dharma is the basis for everything else. Without this sense of righteousness, this sense of harmony, then destruction can follow, and destruction does follow. This whole story is a story of ups and downs, and how do we courageously deal with them. It is not to do with smoothness, because it's a history. It's to do with real life. So Ayodhya means invincible because its administrative structure is well laid out. And in those days, in the ancient times, as in these times, there were moments of peace and there were moments of war. Dasaratha is the king. Dasaratha means that one who possesses or who's armed with 10 chariots. And we can get some idea living in Ireland when we hear the word rath, means a fortress, I think. And so, yes, the same idea. A moving fortress. Every chariot was like an armored vehicle. Today, in the Russian-Ukraine war, we see many skeletons or corpses, if you like, of armored vehicles hit by missiles. So the armored vehicle of its day was twofold. Elephants. Elephants were the tanks of the ancient days. And they also had the capacity, of course, to themselves injure, not just carry parties. And their strength was able to penetrate many, many resistance pockets. And then the chariot had a facility to be mobile. It could be manipulated so easily, but it took great skill. And so people had to be trained in this. The kingdom of Koshala lay just north of the Ganga River. It lay on a tributary, Sharayu. Dasaratha, the one who was armed with 10 chariots, tells something about his character and his power and his wisdom also, and his skill. And then we have three queens. The first is Kausalya, Sumitra is there, Kaikeyi is there, because in those days the king had to make sure he had progeny. And the difficulty, despite all the prosperity, well laid out gardens, proper sewage systems, grain storage. We can get some idea from two sources. One source would be, as I mentioned last week, the architectural or the archaeological sites, I should say, at Harappa and the Indus Valley civilizations, what we might call the Indus, Gangetic, and Saraswati plains, along those lines. And we get some other insight when we go to other distant places, when we go to such ruins that we find in the ancient kingdoms or the kingdoms to the east, where traders went and spread Indian culture, Hinduism, if you want to call it Hinduism, and vast cities and temples were built. So prosperous, so well laid out, so amazingly engineered that when you put blocks together of stone, they are exactly smooth so that one fits exactly on the other with no mortar. Such great engineering feats are there. We have the story of Vishwamitra, and the sage Vashishter comes into it also. And the two are connected. Vashishter is the chief rishi or advisor to King Dasarathi. He's the household preceptor in the royal palace. And then we have the story of Vishwamitra. So within the story of Rama, we find all these different sub-stories, all these different deviations, as we would expect in any historical account. It's not straightforward. And each one has a profound lesson. So let us try and pick up now, with all of this in mind, the start of this first chapter, the Balakandam. Now we mentioned, of course, where this Koshala lies, but it's a very ancient kingdom because those who know anything about, even in the Bhagavad Gita, there was mention of such great kings, the solar dynasty, which is there. There are many dynasties that decide that they will be called solar dynasties, bringing light and knowledge everywhere, shining like the sun. Solar dynasty was used, the solar king, the sun king, building Versailles Palace, for example. And we've heard of characters such as Manu, Ikshwaku. It gives us a clue about the extent of kingdoms, because Ikshwaku implies cultivation of sugarcane, which we don't find in the north of India. And then Raghu, the renowned Dasaratha, was really a typical ruler in terms of handling war, in terms of handling peace. And both of these are inevitable in life itself. Even in our own life, we can easily come across moments of peaceful mind and moments of disturbed mind. He had the privilege of waging a victorious war, allying himself with celestial beings. Don't forget, although it's a historical account, the poet incorporates all the mythologies of his day, but we can give a philosophical meaning to celestials. Celestials are divine graces spread everywhere that condense as reality for us. Now, he entertained, of course, a paternal affection towards his subjects. And it was always from the sages and the saints, the wise people, that Dasaratha got advice, both our personal and public concerns. So when we think of a king ruling a kingdom, and when we look at the Artha Shastra and see how busy a king is, and the art of warfare, I'll give you an example, how sophisticated it was. You consider a system called mandala, a series of concentric circles. You place your own country in the middle. And then around your country, you have neighbors, whatever countries are surrounding or regions are surrounding your own region or your own empire. And you consider these as potentially hostile. In order to defend your own kingdom, you take the next circle outside that and all the countries outside that and form diplomatic relations, have good trade with them, good, wonderful relationships, not just in commerce and trade and industry, but also in making treaties, because they will be threatening those immediately surrounding you. And so it goes on, out and out and out. In today, this is a useful technique. In modern politics, if you follow this ancient system, you can see how you can protect yourself by making diplomatic relations with the country that is not on your border. Yes, you have good relationships with that, but you have even better relationships with those surrounding those countries. So you can see how busy from dawn to dusk, described in Arthashastra, how kings were, how they got up and what their daily duties were. But they weren't autocrats, is what I'm saying. They had advisors around them, and these were not just ordinary advisors. These were rishis, Vashishter being the chief person. And these people would have been in touch with citizens, gathering their complaints. So it wasn't that the autocratic king was out of touch with the needs of the kingdom. Indeed, if he was, he would come under threat of another king taking over. And the people in turn were properly educated, virtuous to the core. The key to any harmonious society will be that they are well educated in all things. But of course, the basis of education is this Dharma. And that is why they were also virtuous. They were industrious, they were bent on increasing the wealth of the empire, not the wealth for themselves. This is not capitalism. This is nor is it socialism entirely. This is a form of a mixture where the bulk of people will be dedicated to wealth creation, the second aim of life. But the wealth creation is creation for the wealth of every person, for all. A position that has social conscience in it. And there were, of course, in the country, all-round combination, contentment and happiness. Such an idyllic picture is being painted, with parks and fountains as well, places where people could go for leisure, just as we have in some of the major cities of the world today. And nature also is bounteous. Why? Because when a society is harmonious and all thinking on a higher level, on a nobler level, nature responds to it. It cannot help but respond to it. People talk about nature as if nature is something separate from us. No, we're included in it. And the most powerful tool we have is thought. If we knew how to handle it properly, we could get anything we want. And so this leads us to the third aim, which is desire. Desire, legitimate desire, not selfish desire, but desires which incorporate the benefit of all, including yourself. And then finally, having all of that behind it, the whole purpose of all of this is to lead the whole of society toward a final state of liberation, where you transcend, where you use your noble qualities as stepping stones, as it were, to an opening up which we call freedom or liberation. So we can understand that this is a kingdom of culture, a kingdom of happiness, a kingdom where nature itself is bounteous, a kingdom where rainfall follows in its due seasons. Human excellences are there, and the earth is fertile and productive, rainfall measured and periodical, and the kingdom fared well, in tune with the gift of providence. Now, much of this we had said last week, so I'm reminding you of the condition, which is Ayodhya. This is what makes it invincible, Ayodhya. But of course, we can have all the ideal environment. We can live in an ideal social harmony. We are told that there are some Scandinavian countries that are deemed to be the happiest countries in the world. I'm not quite sure how they measure it, but I think they really mean contented, because happiness implies a kind of internal joy. Everybody's happy to the extreme. But certainly, if you have a good settled quality of life for most people, then people are at least content. And in the midst of all of this, though, one social problem arises. If the system is that the king is intrinsic to all of this harmony, then there must be a successor. Dasaratha had been this administrative king for many, many years. 3 queens are there, and still there's no one to succeed. You see the urgency of this when you look at the life of every king. Let us say English monarchs, for example. There's an urgency for Henry VIII to have some successor, and it must be, in those days, a male successor. As it turned out, he had a female successor, Queen Elizabeth. I always remember Swami Dayatmananda having an opening icebreaker, which said, as Henry VIII said to all his wives, "I won't keep you long." So this became an urgent concern, not just for the king, but now you can see the whole of society is concerned about this. And the lack of progeny is a serious thing, not just for the king, because the king wants to retire and hand it over to a worthy successor. And all the other blessings in life have come to nothing because he happened to be without this issue. And we can see an echo in our own life. We can have all the wonders and blessings in the world, but some area of discontent always remains. We always have to find some level of fulfillment still. Where do we find such a thing? We find it through prayer. What kind of prayer? Prayer that will be beneficial for the overall good. And so the boon of the son, the gift of a son, was Dasaratha's key wish, and he knew how to get it. Because in those days, part of science was to understand how you fulfill all your desires, whatever you want. This is a formula that is not really secret, but very few people understand or know it. The power of thought. What is prayer? It's a thought movement in a certain cosmic direction that opens up cosmic forces. If you did a research on it, and there have been some researches, the power of prayer, there's no convincing outcome. Why is that? It's because most prayer is not positive. Most prayer will give you a negative, insert a negative inside it, a kind of begging thing. So we have to be careful about the science of it. There was a certain devotee recently, "Oh, I can't get a job, my income is very low, I have to support a family, what can I do? And my reply to him was, remove your doubt, have faith. Have faith that there is a protecting being around you, a part intrinsically within you, and provides you with a free gift to get you whatever you like. This is thought. And we see throughout the whole story of Rama, the greatest weapons will be the weapon of the psyche, the thought, the mind. Because behind everything is the infallible thinker, and therefore every thought is infallible and reaches the end of its destiny and materialization for you. But there has to be some preparation. Like a machine, you put a machine in to get what you want. What is the nature of this machine? It is called yajna or yaga. And so when he consulted the wise people about how to arrange a religious sacrifice that will yield what he wants, he had to naturally consult the experts on this. Vishwamitra was the sage, well experienced in this field, in this science. And therefore, Dasaratha reverentially approached him, and to the luck of the king, the great rishi gave his consent to execute a very elaborate ritual. When we do puja even, or any kind of ceremony or prayer, there has to be some mental preparation first. We have to approach it with a spirit of reverence. We have to prepare the mind nicely. We have to clean the mind out, as it were, and make way for new thoughts, new movements, and new opportunities. And so all these royal arrangements were meticulously made for the performance of this sacrifice. And what the sacrifice means, we have to understand the technicality of it. And just as a modern scientist will use the atomic power both for constructive and destructive purposes. You can see the power of nuclear power provides us with great energy, but it can also decimate a whole village, a whole town, a whole city, indeed a whole nation. This is the difficulty today, that we have access to nuclear weapons of immense power. In those days, they had access to weapons of immense power too. Some people thinking and knowing that this is a historical account when it comes to the warfare and all the weapons that are being used, may take it that even in these ancient days, they knew the power of something like atomic weapons, missiles. Others may say they knew the power of thought, that thought was the missile. In any event, there can be a combination of these two things, because thought will produce whatever you want. Anyway, the ancient rishis knew how to harness psychic power for the good, of course, occasionally for the evil too. The great, some of the great Vedas, we will see provision for curses as well. And of all the powers of nature, psyche, the mind, is the subtlest and is the most powerful. We have to remember this in our daily life, because a thought comes in quickly like this and goes just as quickly. And where is thought coming from? Mainly it's coming from a reaction using a thought current to external events, and the reaction comes from the subconscious level. And the art of yoga is to, first of all, understand what status the mind, what status are we in currently, what state the unconscious mind is in, make an assessment, and then make every effort not to address it directly, but to fill it with conscious thoughts of truth and goodness and strength. It can be commissioned, the mind can be commissioned to commune with God and to achieve anything in life as a result. And by God, we mean that principle that creates a harmony. And the principle that creates a harmony is called Vishnu, because Vishnu means the entity, the divine aspect that penetrates and manifests the entire universe everywhere. So all of this technique will come under the law of causation at the mental level. And causation, or when we talk at the scientific level, the causation is to do with mastering matter, material. And there's no such thing as material separate from spirit, and the ancient sages knew it. King Dasaratha and his 3 queens had put themselves under strict physical and mental discipline as a preliminary to this yajna. If you are participating in this, then this is the point of fasting on a day of puja, for example. And fasting doesn't just mean denying yourself food. It means taking the available attentive energy and moving it towards the spiritual base of life. Being tuned in to the cosmic balancing power, the cosmic mind that religion calls God. What they did was what we call tapas, or austerity. Not necessarily denying yourself something, but moving your attention toward a higher dimension, toward the infinite. And nothing great can be achieved without doing this. So the sacrificial rituals were peremptorily carried out as enjoined by the scriptures, that is, people who knew the technique and mobilized it. You have to remember that in the Vedic days, in the beginning, people stood in awe of the powers of nature and divinized them, understood there is a divine being that is mobilizing the wind, mobilizing the rains. This aspect of mobilizing that was called Indra, for without this rain, starvation is there. Most important. And Indra then became that god, that chief of all the other Indriyas or senses, be it cosmic or be it personal. The microcosm and macrocosm, these are just mutual echoes of each other. And so the scriptures, first of all, have this great praise for all the elements. But soon the rishis understood, actually, instead of us being children, instead of us being subject to these divine forces, they are actually subject to us. We can mobilize them through the power of thought called mantras and the power of ritual. And when you combine ritual and mantras, you can get whatever you want. You yourself are the creator of your own destiny. This is a great lesson that we all have to learn. Now, at the same time as all this was happening and this preparation for this yajna was happening, there was a parallel happening, we can say, in heaven. And here we have to use our imagination. We have to personalize all these forces. The celestials were approached the creator, Brahma, because Brahma is the dispenser of all things. Brahma is the cosmic mind. They complained to him about some atrocities from what is called a demon. What does it mean? Somebody who has the potential for goodness, but is misusing it. And we know that the name of this being was Ravana. So now we have some names. We have Rama. Last week we talked about Valmiki. We have Bharata, we have Lakshmana, we have Shatrughna, we have Vishwamitra, we have Vashishter, we have Koshala, we have Sumitra, we have Kaikeyi, we have Dasaratha, and we have Ayodhya and Koshala. These are names that will be repeated time and time again, and we have this Ravana, the demon of Lanka. What is a demon? An ordinary struggling person who has decided to be imbued with all the individualistic, egoistic qualities of lust, greed, exercising power, and anger. So that lust-laden being we call a Rakshasa, as opposed to a Deva. And Rakshasa, this Ravana, was infuriated with pride because the cosmic mind that we call Brahma had bestowed on him the boon of invincibility. Now we can see a tie with the name Ayodhya. Ravana was invincible. He got this boon of being invincible. Ayodhya is invincible. So he was unconquerable by any being except man, because man he deemed to be insignificant. It's just a non-entity. If you have control of the entire universal forces, then what can man do? Puny man. Now Brahma, with the retinue, presented these problems to the rescuing power of Mahavishnu, that great penetrating being. And we can imagine there on the throne, the Lord of the universe in the form of Vishnu smiles. He said he would come forth, incarnate, avatara, come down, descend as a cosmic balancing power, as he does from time to time, as man, and what more virtuous person could he select than Dasaratha, and ultimately set right the evil. In other words, restore Dharma to that whole region, and also teach us the principles of this harmony for all time as well. So now we have a wonderful match, a wonderful woven set of circumstances that satisfy Dasaratha's desire for progeny and also satisfies the entire kingdom for a maintenance of its cultural qualities, and a virtuous successor is satisfied on the one hand, and on the other hand, the world is rescued from this Ravana. So let's go back to Earth now. Two events playing out, two dramas happening in parallel, all synchronized together. And so on Earth, the performance of the yajna was started. And when this was at its very zenith, a resplendent deity comes out from the fire. The sacred fire, solemnly, this deity offers to Dasaratha a gold vessel containing what we call a milk pudding, payasam, a kind of rice pudding, if you will, a creamy thing that is sacred, that is liked, that is sweet. And so the sweetness is being offered. Let us see what is the significance of this. When we now perform havan or a yajna, or even a puja, or even a prayer or a meditation, we will receive some sweetness from it. Some divine sweetness will come to us, like taking milk pudding, a prasad. When we offer something into the fire, or when we offer something in puja, the Lord of the universe takes the subtle portion, and we take the gross portion, and we call this prasad. But this prasad has a potency. In the Roman Catholic tradition, there is something called communion. That is, it is seen that the Lord of the universe takes the form of common bread. The deep spiritual significance is that bread is life, food is life. And so what is our life? When we take the divine within us, this is life, this is the source of life. And we enter into a communion which can be a mystic union for those who understand it as a zenith. So some sweetness comes, and the sweetness inevitably will translate into the material needs and fulfillment. Then the deity instructed the king to distribute this beautiful ambrosia, this payasam, among the three queens, specifically for progeny, the intention being sustained. This now becomes the main key ingredient to get what we want. And so he distributes half of the portion to Kausalya, the first queen, and a quarter to Sumitra, and the remaining he gives to Kaikeyi, the third queen. But still there's a little left in the vessel, and whatever remnant was there, he gives to Sumitra, and this has the effect now of her having twins. Lakshmana and Shatrughna are born to her, and the rest, Bharata, of course, is born to the Queen Kaikeyi, and Rama is born to Queen Kausalya. We know the time because as the wheel rolled on, the planets also rolled on their courses, and 5 of them now moved to their respective zodiacal constellation. The importance of the whole cosmos contributing toward these significant events, and continue to do so. And it is rare that these five should move to an alignment. And then we know that when something like that happens, a birth at this juncture is bound to be the embodiment of divinity. This is behind the Christian Star of Bethlehem. And this auspicious time came on the 9th day of the bright fortnight of Chitra, that is April-May, the period in which we are now, or we have just passed it. It was at that benign moment that Rama was born of Kausalya. And subsequently, Kaikeyi gave birth to Bharata. Then Sumitra begat the twins Lakshmana and Shatrughna. And these four brothers are the embodiment of qualities. Let us understand what these qualities are. Rama is the embodiment of Dharma. Throughout the entire story, we have to understand this. Some difficult decisions have to be made, not only because he is a king of the future, and therefore has to have this quality, but also throughout all the steps in the story. Bharata, he is the embodiment of truth. Even when, and we'll see later in the story, Rama is banished for 14 years, and Bharata is put on the throne. And Bharata is himself only considered as a temporary measure, keeping Rama's shoes there, not really. We call it an interregnum, if you like, an interim monarch, because he is aligned to pure truthfulness. And then Lakshmana, fidelity. Wherever Rama goes, Lakshmana goes. And these four brothers form a fraternal alliance. And so twin pairs, if you will. Rama and Lakshmana go together. Why is that? It's because righteousness and fidelity have to go together. And truth and heroism go together. And these are the other two qualities which are there. Now, naturally, they were educated well. Education is the key to everything. They were educated on sound lines because they have to be taught as the future protectors of society. And unlike other people educated in other skills, being Kshatriyas, that is, military people, administrators, people who will set the example and be a model, playing their part in life, their particular swadharma, what they themselves are born to do. Now you will see there is a difference in concept sometimes that people have in spiritual life. That the spiritual life, to be spiritual, you have to withdraw from all your duties. Go into a cave somewhere, go on pilgrimage, go into a cave somewhere like Ramana Maharshi, sit there with the inquiry, who am I, who am I? That's what he did. And divorce yourself from all the activities, thinking that these are inferior. But that is not the case. And all of our models that we come across in the Vedanta, including this model in the story of Rama, because Rama is the main character in this. Rama and Sita, the other person, of course, we have to understand. Sita, the one born from a furrow, the one who comes from the earth. Rama, the embodiment of perfection and righteousness and harmony. And Sita, earth, the junction, if you like, between sun and earth, between the practical, this world, and the world that is our inner world. And the joint of these two go together, and one doesn't work without the other. Material life does not work without spiritual life, and spiritual life does not work without material life, even because we have to eat, we have to drink, we have to sleep. There are some things that we require physically. So we cannot ignore the material life, but we can divinize it. That's the point. And so the quality of strength, the quality of courage, the quality to be able to deal with the vicissitudes of life that will come up for everybody. The knowledge of how to get around obstacles and still be useful, not just for ourselves, that would not work, but for the benefit of everybody, being an open channel for divine grace for all. That would be the highest Dharma. So they had parts to play in the world as its active members. Religion was the basis of life. It was inculcated in them as the core of their human life. So morality and spirituality got well ingrained in them together. And so what would they used to study? They would have studied the Vedas. Vedas contain all the science and knowledge of life, cosmology and physics, but also contain the other portion, the portion of righteousness, good behavior, and ultimately we come across the Upanishads, the road to inner life that takes us to freedom. The auxiliaries to the Vedas and the other branches of knowledge were imparted to them. What did they require? Physical culture, they had to be physically strong. This was of prime importance. Is it of prime importance to us? Yes. What's the danger? That we fall into body consciousness. If we can perform all the yoga exercises, Swami Vivekananda said, this life is a gymnasium. There's a reason why he said that. Emphasizing strength, physical strength, strength of mind, strength to change course, strength to look at obstacles, knowing that they are there and will always be there, and knowing the technique of getting around them in a joyful, skillful, scientific, progressive way that is always confident. So physical culture naturally was of great importance, more so for them. They have to engage possibly in military activities. And so archery was important. You know, if you put it in modern terms, military discipline, horse riding in those days, elephant riding even, and the maneuver of chariots that I mentioned previously. These royal youths became experts in all of this. Educating the whole personality was what was given to them, in other words. Same thing we can do for our own children. But inevitably, education today begins and ends with information. Information transfer is not real education. Swami Vivekananda was very clear about that. So deep-rooted in spirituality, that's the point. Molded in sterling character, and ever intent on doing good for others is the real educative value that all of us have to inculcate. And that is also built into the fine and strong physique, brilliant in warfare, all of these qualities that are necessary. And in our own life, we have to see what qualities are necessary for us as well. And we would not be far off if we emulated these same qualities. We have to see them as divine attributes given to us as possibilities to improve our total person, physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual. Now the four brothers, they loved each other dearly, is another lesson for us. How many times we see in domestic life people squabbling? So they loved each other dearly. Don't forget, these are the embodiment of righteousness, embodiment of fidelity and truth and courage. And so the brothers were, of course, ideal, but they were also much loved by their parents, and they in turn loved their parents. And they loved all the people who were there, and Rama in particular was to one and all a source of great joy. He was like the pole star of the future because the whole of society saw not just a successor, but an ideal successor also. To take over a kingdom and do what your predecessor did is one thing. To take over a kingdom and improve it and go with the modern times is another. And he shared his ideas with the counselors and other seniors, not working on his own. They were all unanimous in their opinion that this was a worthy successor to King Dasaratha. Now, this is an introduction really to the Balakandam. But the next thing that we have to understand is a drama that comes in from the character Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra by itself is a great, great lesson for us. So I'm going to begin with a story. We can continue next week. This idea of Dasaratha coming. So we can understand how these sons grew up, happy, strong, virtuous, brave, lovable, with all their princely qualities are there. But one day, as the king was contemplating his son's matrimony, a comment has to be made. I make it probably more next week. That the important thing, of course, is not only that you have a successor, but they also have successors. And this spiritual life that most people are involved in requires matrimony, it requires children, progeny, it requires love, it requires a domestic environment that is suitable for all of these things. Again, for harmony in your domestic life as well, something that sometimes we find quite rare today. But in those ancient days, and even today in India, the wedlock, of course, is a sacred act everywhere. Well, certainly wherever a religious ceremony is required, because the words of the Christian marriage ceremony were words that were related by Sister Nivedita to Holy Mother Sharada Devi, and she was absolutely enthralled and delighted with the vows and commitments of this Western Christian ceremony. And so there's a universality about this union, which we call marriage, and it starts as a betrothal, it ends as a marriage. The child betrothal was, of course, common in ancient days, and we know even today. It was adopted, of course, in those days in a wise way, not in a manipulative way. We have to be careful that arranged marriages are for the benefit of those who are engaged in it, not for the benefit of parents or family members. That's the danger. But when you apply wisdom, it works well. And it minimizes the vagaries of lust. In young age, before lust sets in, unbreakable relationships can be created between husband and wife. They can learn to love each other after the marriage, but also kind of as brothers and sisters with a certain freedom of compatibility that wise parents will know, almost giving the effect of a predestined marriage that is auspicious, if handled correctly. If not handled correctly, it's a disaster. The relationship cultivated among the brothers and sisters is providential if handled successfully. Anyway, conjugal relationship is created by the parents concerned. It is almost as good as providential if it is handled in a prayerful way, in a way which is beneficial for everyone and is in tune with the cosmic will. So on the background of all of this, Vishwamitra enters the scene. And he enters while the king is contemplating his son's marriage, his son's matrimony. The ushers rushed in to announce to the great sage, Vishwamitra, a very daunting personality, one who has dignity, one who is known to be extremely powerful. And he was held in awe by all. He was held in awe by all as the most powerful among rishis, even more powerful than Vashishter, who was originally his rival and was in a sense the cause of his aspiration to get to the state of Brahma Rishi, the highest possible status of any rishi. Anyway, Vishwamitra's arrival at Ayodhya was unexpected, and King Dasaratha stepped down from his throne and advanced a few paces respectfully to receive the sage. Vishwamitra was a king who he was originally a king, he attained great sainthood, and he did it through terrible, terrible, harsh austerities. He had long ago exhibited his spiritual powers by starting to create another Brahma and a rival universe, and we can tell that story next week. And he had gone as far as the creation of new constellations even. That's how powerful he was, but was prevailed upon to stop by the entreaties of the alarmed deities. This whole story will unfold next week, the story of Vishwamitra and the lessons, practical lessons it has for us. So we'll leave it there for this session. Thank you. And we'll finish off with repeating a peace prayer. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Swamiji. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Om